Hi, I'm Derek Ashong. Welcome to the pre-show of the stream. We're going to talk a little bit about some current events that are in the news. Shortly, we'll be going live on air, and as always, you're invited to join us in our post-show where we get to talk in greater depth about some of the issues that have been raised and also about some new stuff. Today, we've got an amazing show for you. We're going to do different things in pre-broadcast and post-show, so definitely stay with us. Ahmed, Noura, great to see you both. We heard some interesting news this week about a report that was issued by the General Rapporteur of NATO yesterday. And basically, NATO's been hosting a conference about internet security. And they named anonymous the loose amalgamation of I don't even know what to call them. It's like
hackers, cyber dissidents.
Exactly.
Hacktivists, they call it.
Yeah, they don't like
hacktivists, but some people say they're hackers, some people say they're dissidents.
Yeah, a loose coalition of people online.
Loose coalition of people online who engage in various activities, lulls, which are kind of things they do for fun, kind of pranks, but then also more serious efforts like the hacking of PayPal and Visa in the wake of their canceling of WikiLeaks account back in the fall, and also their involvement in things like the Tunisian uprising and also the uprising in Egypt, where they retaliated against some of these governments who were taking steps to either censor or shut down the internet. Yeah. The interesting thing here is NATO is saying, well, Anonymous is a threat, just like Al-Qaeda, like the Taliban, like North Korea. They put them on their enemies list.
And WikiLeaks. They're equating Anonymous and WikiLeaks.
Absolutely. And they're stating that they are going to attempt to infiltrate and persecute the members of this coalition. So what do you guys think about this?
Well, the only thing I have to say is I hope NATO doesn't create a similar version of the U.S. war on terror, which is absolutely ineffective, disastrous, too expensive, and will take us nowhere. So imagine if they tried to attack Anonymous in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, how do you attack someone who's not visible in real life, and doesn't have a structured central base, but then also online is virtually invisible as well? Well, so even online they're hard to track.
Well, and I think this is part of the interesting thing to me is are they creating a conflict where one doesn't actually exist potentially?
NATO.
NATO, because NATO is, I mean, it's a coalition of nation states. It's a military coalition, but it's an international one, and there hasn't heretofore been any declaration by Anonymous that we're in conflict with NATO. They've just been doing all kinds of specific and targeted attacks.
But it seems like it's more of the congealing of a type of activism that's already existed, and one that is about the dispersion and dissemination and access to information without any impediments. So that they've actually organized themselves with an address known as Anonymous just makes them more visible, but doesn't make them any more unique.
Well, the thing that, I mean, I think there are some things that are unique in the way in which they operate, but I think what's interesting here is that NATO has basically made a preemptive salvo, and Anonymous has responded and said, okay.
Well, this is what I love. Anonymous is saying, they're warning NATO back, and the nice thing is that they really don't have fear, and I do kind of admire that because NATO is kind of saber-rattling, trying to provoke things and saying that they're a security threat not just to the NATO countries, but also he referenced the Arab countries and their roles in the uprisings there, which we were just talking about. But I don't know if it's worth quoting this, but it says right here, I don't know if you can see this, actually you can, so good. It says, do not make the mistake of challenging Anonymous. Do not make the mistake of believing you can behead a headless snake. If you slice off one head of Hydra, 10 more will grow in its place. If you cut down one Anon, 10 more will join us purely out of anger at your trampling of dissent. So they have a really kind of attractive platform, which is voices of dissent don't suppress us.
And to give you an idea of what they're responding to, this is from the Special Rapporteur's report. He said, today the ad hoc international group of hackers and activists is said to have thousands of operatives and has no set rules or membership. It remains to be seen how much time Anonymous has for pursuing such paths. The longer these attacks persist, the more likely countermeasures will be developed, implemented, the groups will be infiltrated, and perpetrators persecuted. Now, one of the interesting things about what they said is that the whole issue of transparency, they are basically saying that governments and corporations have a right to privacy, which is being violated by collectives like Anonymous, and so that right should not be violated. But part of the issue, and that they have to preserve that right to privacy in order to protect the interests of the people. And the question I'm asking is, okay, so how do you know that your government necessarily has
Your best interest
at heart.
Totally. I mean, that's to say, it's easy to say we're protecting you, that's why we need to be private. But then so often when you see these WikiLeaks, you know, or when you see things leaked out, whether it's WikiLeaks or not, there's reason to believe that your government may have your best interests at heart, but I don't know. I don't believe governments base their policies in altruism.
On people's best interests. Well, I want to first make a distinction between corporations and states. Although there is a linkage between them, between business elite and state elite, and we see that demonstrated especially in developing countries. In our situation here where the private market is unfettered, I say the more transparent, the better. Let's make this, you know, let's see what fair market looks like. But in terms of governments, if one is to believe that government actually has a role in our lives and is to be led by civil servants that is in our best interest, then there is something to be said for
about letting them do it behind a closed door.
I mean, just a little bit. I mean, I'm not one. I do believe in transparency and accountability in government, but imagine an absolute transparent policy. It would signal the end of politics and really a new era. As we know it. It's true.
But this is the thing. I agree with you. For example, like with the WikiLeaks release of all the diplomatic cables, I'm like, well, if diplomats can't have private communication, then there's no hope for any kind of, you know, peace between nations, because you can't just say anything to anybody all the time. So I agree that the transparency has its limits, but the thing that troubles me is this idea that we've got to presume that your government has your best interest at heart. Look, no government says, you know what, security is always the excuse. They never say we're cracking down on these people because we hate them. They never say we're going to crack down on these people because we would really like to get rid of them. They'll say we've got to crack down in order in the interest of security.
Well, you used the word security. One country that does that, I think, indelibly is Israel. And I don't mean to bring this up. I know we're going to be talking about, you know, Palestine-Israeli conflict a bit later. But, you know, that's one example where I just wonder, maybe even the government might think that it does have the citizens' best interest at heart, but perhaps, you know, their policies aren't always...
Well, we're going to be speaking to an Israeli citizen and as well as some Palestinians about this issue today. And unfortunately, it's time to go on air, so we're going to jump right into it. Obviously going to be an interesting one. Thanks for joining us in the pre-show. We will see you on air in a few seconds. Hi, I'm Derek Ashong, and you are now in The Stream, a social media community with its own daily TV show. We're bringing you stories that are ongoing, global, and sourced from social media. Today, how bloggers in Palestine are challenging the narratives of mainstream media. As always, our digital producer, Ahmed Shihab Eldin, is here, and joining us on the couch today is Noura Erakat, who is the Legal Advocacy Coordinator for BIDL, a resource center for Palestinian refugee and residency rights. Noura, tell us a little bit about how the Arab Spring has been affecting Palestinians.
It's affected Palestinians tremendously. So first, let's just note that for most Palestinians, we do believe that we have been at the forefront of using non-violent mass movement as a form of transformative social change. And so, of course, we saw the end of that era in the first Intifada, and now a resurgence of it on a more regional scale as Palestinians from throughout the region have marched onto Israel's borders to demand the right of return, to affirm the right of return, but also in this bubbling movement of increasing nonviolent civil disobedience, those things that are akin to what the U.S. knows best in its civil rights era as well.
Well, we have some really interesting and compelling footage of people engaging in some of that nonviolent protest that I would love to get your thoughts about that in just a minute. Before we jump deeper into the topic though, Ahmed, what kind of stuff have people been saying to us online?
Well, today a story was shared with us from Kenya, from Mko, Kenya. He is basically highlighting what is being called the participatory budgeting in Kenya. So what's happened is for several months now, Kenyans and the government particularly is trying to make, you know, efforts to be more tech savvy. And one of which we're going to talk about today, is the actual Deputy Prime Minister and Kenya's Minister of Finance, Uhuru Kenyatta, as you can see right here, has done some really innovative things. I mean, he has a big following on Facebook, over 70,000 people, and Twitter as well. And what he's essentially done is he's reached out to the Kenyan people and asked them to suggest and to give their input on what should be in this year's budget. And so he just gave his speech today. And rather than me telling you what he said, I'm just going to let him speak right here for a second. Let's listen and see what he said.
On the budget. We also put up a page on the Treasury website for the same purpose. Apart from these measures, I personally also took the liberty to include the growing number of tech-savvy Kenyans who are active on social media through an online suggestion form and a Facebook and Twitter campaign on my official pages. Through these tweets, Facebook wall posts, emails, and blogs, we received more than 3,000 submissions, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank all those who performed this most patriotic duty.
So basically what happened is, people, thousands of Kenyans sent in, suggestions, and he actually took them into consideration, and he gave this big speech, and as you can see, he's using, social networking and also his Facebook page as a real platform to inform citizens. Right here, this is his budget speech using Scribd. He's allowing people, and he's giving a citizen's guide, which he tweeted out. This is his Twitter. He said it's a simplified citizen's guide to the budget that he announced, and you can just see right here how exhaustive it is, and it's, again, taking into account what the actual citizens want.
Well, have people responded to it? Have they said, this is reflective of the kind of things we've been talking
about?
Yeah,
definitely, and there's a conversation going on Twitter. I'll give you one example. Naib_AJ is saying he's waiting to see all leaders get active on Twitter and Facebook because Kenyatta is really leading the pack.
Well, I love a story like this where you see Africa leading the way on how leadership could be. And we've had a lot of problems. Yeah, absolutely. We've had a lot of problems with African leadership. I think this is a great example of what's possible.
Yeah, and he's getting a lot of support. Mitzman is saying, wanna big you up, you are the funkiest, iPad and all. And the reason he's referencing the iPad is because he was using an iPad during his speech. So we're seeing really interesting applications in governance.
Well, we had done a story 2 weeks ago about how mobile penetration in Africa is 150%. There are more mobile devices in Africa than in North America. So let's hope that technology continues to advance with the flow of democracy.
Right. And if you want to advance this conversation or any other conversation, you can always tweet us and share your stories with us at AJStream.
Hi, I'm Trisha Wong, and I use social media to listen to the world, and I'm in the stream.
Israel remains on high alert after Sunday's Nakba protests marking the anniversary of Israel's victory in the 1967 war turned violent. More than 20 pro-Palestinian demonstrators were killed in the Golan Heights and hundreds injured across the West Bank. With protests almost a daily occurrence in the Palestinian territories, witnesses and activists have begun live tweeting events as they happen, at times refuting what is reported by the mainstream media. In this particular instance, there is some very compelling footage. If you look at my screen, you can see an image of people at the Kalandia border crossing, and basically, or the Kalandia checkpoint, I should say, and they've been hit with tear gas here. Now, I want to go directly to a video that we found online that was actually sent by a gentleman who was there at these protests, and it shows some images of what was happening. And I just want to lay down some of the groundwork, and then we can discuss a little further. Now, in this instance, a lot of times it's not clear that people, or at least it's not reported that people are engaging in non-violent protests, but you can see that they are being met with a violent response even as they're standing. There's another clip that I would like to share, that this is just a montage from later in the same video that's showing some of what's happened. Now, just looking at this stuff, I mean, you can see there's chaos, and chaos on all sides of the equation. And I think that one of the things that is interesting to me about this is we'll hear reports from mainstream media about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But it seems that the actual people on the ground, the bloggers, the people who are tweeting, the people creating these videos, are giving us more of a visceral understanding of what's happening at places like Kalandia.
And that checkpoint, just worth mentioning, is, you know, one of the largest entry points from the West Bank into Israel. You know, over 25,000 people pass through every day.
It's actually not into Israel, it's into Jerusalem, which
Right.
is part of Palestine and should be considered, and is actually being contested by Israel by unilateral annexation in 1980. What's interesting about this is not that it's just more visceral for the viewer, but because there's the visual, you now understand when Palestinians are saying we're engaging in nonviolent resistance, but are being met with artillery shells, rubber bullets, tear gas, that these are the images, these are the Gandhis that all Western media have been discussing and waiting for, and now they have a number of them.
Well, we saw from the Jerusalem Post posted that roughly 250 Palestinians demonstrated at the Kalandia checkpoint in northern Jerusalem. The demonstrators tried to cross into Israel by foot at the checkpoint around noon and threw rocks, Molotov cocktails, and burning tires at the army and border police forces. Now, interestingly enough, we see this tweet from Ibn Ezra, who says, "I've seen Palestinians throwing stones, but I've not seen or heard of any Molotov cocktails. There was one burning tire, and it was not rolled." So, Ibn Ezra is an Israeli-American journalist, and we're lucky to have him joining us now via Skype in Tel Aviv. His real name is Joseph Dana, and he's an American-Israeli writer and journalist based in Ramallah and Tel Aviv. He's also contributing editor for the independent website Plus 972. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us. We understand that you were at the Kalandia checkpoint and that you got into a bit of a Twitter conflict with some other people who were reporting things that you believed were not true that were happening there. Tell us, what is the essence of what you saw that differs from what was reported?
Well, thanks for having me on the show. I was indeed at the Kalandia checkpoint. I've been going to these unarmed demonstrations for about 3 years, and I've been using Twitter extensively to report exactly what I'm seeing. I'm very careful not to report the hearsay. As you correctly mentioned in the beginning, these demonstrations can get very chaotic, and sometimes you hear people are killed and they're not killed, or they're seriously injured or something like this. And so I take painstaking efforts to make sure that I tweet what I can actually see. And if I hear something, I'll say it's an unconfirmed report. And often I accompany it with a photo, which I think you used one of my photos in the beginning of the montage.
Yes.
And so what I saw was exactly what was going on. I saw two sets of demonstrators. Kalandia is, like you said, a major checkpoint, and so it's a quite large area. I saw unarmed demonstrators throwing stones at Israeli border police who were responding with rubber bullets, live bullets, using tear gas canisters as basically large bullets by shooting them directly at demonstrators. And I saw a group of nonviolent demonstrators using their body, much in this American civil rights kind of manifestation. And this is what I reported.
So this is interesting because Nora was just making the point that people have been engaging in this nonviolent protest for some time, but it's often reported that the Palestinians are engaging in violence when the Israeli forces defended themselves. Now, you as an Israeli are coming with an observation, having been there, that is different from what we might often hear. What was the kind of response that you received on Twitter as you were reporting what you saw?
The response is generally very good. I do get a lot of tweets from, let's call them right-wing Israeli or Israeli supporters that basically refute everything I'm saying, usually citing unsubstantiated reports from institutions like the Jerusalem Post. And I think what we see here is really a challenging of the narrative of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What's going on in Palestine is a struggle for human rights. It's a struggle for civil rights. It's not a struggle for peace like the Israelis tend to argue. The Israelis want peace. The Palestinians want their human rights. And as you can see, this demonstration was an incredible example of that struggle for human rights in this Gandhian, Martin Luther King-like legacy. And I think my tweets, my basic observations as someone that's witnessing this, presents a grave challenge to this narrative, because it immediately brings these images and these stories of human rights struggle to the world without the filter of the Israeli dominated narrative.
Joseph, I wanted to make a comment and then ask you a question, but the comment is that, just to take it, expand the discourse of nonviolence a bit more, that Palestinian civil society in 2005 launched the global boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign, which is part of the nonviolent struggle. The flotilla, the second flotilla that will sail onto Gaza's borders at the end of June, is also part of this nonviolent tradition, as are these marches, so as not to confine the definition of what nonviolent protest is. But my question for you is, these demonstrators were planning a prayer at the border, Christian and Muslim prayer, to demonstrate their inaccessibility to Jerusalem holy sites, as well as several, the convergence of many different forces. And yet it took a dramatic turn, became, as you mentioned, chaotic rather quickly because of the force doled out by Israeli forces almost immediately. Can you speak a little bit about the intricacies of the actual protest itself and how it disintegrated in the process?
Well, the disintegration I blame completely on the Israeli forces. As you can see in these YouTube videos, if you watch them closer, the demonstration started completely nonviolently, zero stone throwing. This was a demonstration that was organized across a broad section of Palestinian civil society. It featured Israeli supporters as well as international supporters, men, women, and children of all political factions. And immediately, almost immediately, it was attacked with an excessive amount of tear gas and stun grenades, which then quickly were moved to rubber bullets and live fire. And so this sort of military repression is indicative of the fact that nonviolent struggle and unarmed resistance is absolutely frightening for the Israeli government, because it challenges their narrative. If the international community starts to understand that the Palestinians are struggling for their human and civil rights, everything changes. The way that we approach the conflict and the way that we understand the statements of the Israeli government come into question, and we have to question our discourse about them.
Now, I want to actually get your thoughts on another point, Joseph, and that is, we were speaking a little bit about how this plays in with the Arab Spring, and I think it's worth considering how it plays in with American policy as well, given the recent speech by Obama and visit of Netanyahu. And I think Ahmed's got a really interesting point that's coming out on Twitter.
Yeah, in Obama's speech, he didn't, well, let me just get to the tweet first. Someone's asking, is there a specific reason to why U.S. foreign policy towards Israel and Palestine is so ambiguous? And a lot of these questions are saying, is there any point of optimism? Now, in Obama's speech on the Middle East, he mentioned the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but didn't focus on the nonviolence, which has been something that we've seen throughout the Arab awakening. And so I just wonder, maybe you can speak to, will social media and all these blogs and all these videos that you're partaking in, do you think change the narrative and actually change the West's perception of the conflict?
I think that the change is slow, but it's coming, and Twitter is a very good example of how fast it's coming, because it really brings the immediacy of the demonstrations into the hands of the international community. Now, this insanity about Palestinians not having nonviolence, I think is almost laughable, but it is indicative of the fact that we've accepted this Israeli narrative of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Recently, Thomas Friedman, who is, by all accounts, a very strong liberal Zionist writer at the New York Times, wrote a piece arguing that Palestinians need to do exactly what they did in the Calandia demonstration, have an unarmed demonstration marching to Jerusalem. He wrote about this as if it would take place in the future and everything will change. Well, this has been going on, and as Nora said, the Palestinian First Intifada is a crowning achievement of nonviolent mobilization and massive civilian resistance, which is completely ignored in the debate. And so nonviolence and the so-called Arab Spring is not coming to Palestine. It's always been here.
Joseph, before we let you go, I want to ask you one other question. Your views are very much in accordance with a lot of things that we've been hearing from people in the region, particularly on the Palestinian side, and people who are concerned about the human rights, but they're very different and divergent from what we've been hearing from a lot of Israeli media, as well as from Prime Minister Netanyahu. How do your beliefs fit within the pantheon of the Israeli citizenry?
Well, unfortunately, my views are considered radical inside of the Israeli discourse, and that's natural. Israel is grappling with the fact that it is maintaining an absolutely unsustainable military occupation. And it's starting to disintegrate under that weight, in my opinion, from a cultural and intellectual point of view. This is very similar to what happened in apartheid South Africa towards the end of the apartheid regime. And I think that that's what we're experiencing now. But 972, this magazine, which I'm a contributing editor of, does represent a new voice in this very problematic debate. It does represent the fact that there are some Israelis here that are understanding the nature of this debate and this conflict from a rights perspective, from a human and civil rights perspective. And we're using social media. Social media is bringing the immediacy of our opinions to the international community. It's difficult work, but we're trying the best that we can.
Joseph, I want to thank you very much for joining us from Tel Aviv. We appreciate the information that you could give us to give some more context to the images that we've been viewing. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Remember, if you want to share your stories with us, tweet us at AJStream. We rely on you, our online community, to keep us informed. Next, why bloggers in Gaza have become wary of mainstream media.
I'm Mangoba Numalu. I'm from Swaziland, Africa, the southern tip of the continent. I'm a journalist. I'm a social media person. I'm part of the stream.
The Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt reopened on Wednesday, days after the Egyptian government had closed it without warning. On the day of the closure, Palestinians were left confused as media continued to report that the crossing was still open. A few Gazan bloggers decided to go there and tell us what was really happening. This is a video that was shared by one of these bloggers who was actually there.
I know some people, including myself, have been here since Thursday, and it's been very humiliating. There are patients, there are many people who really need to get to the other side of the border. It doesn't seem that the place needs to be refurbished. As a matter of fact, there are other problems that we don't know about, and it's very surprising. I mean, the Egyptians voluntarily announced that they would open the border, but since then things have been actually worse. There are thousands of people here, and nobody has any idea what's going to happen.
So basically, he's stating that they closed the border. Suddenly, they announced on May 28th that they would open the border. Actually, they announced it previously, but May 28th they opened it. On June 4th, last Saturday, they closed it down without informing the Hamas side, the Palestinian side, that it was going to be closed. So there was a lot of confusion, and this is an example of somebody reflecting upon that. Now, we're fortunate because one of the people who created this video, she's actually the face that you see present, was there. And we're hopefully going to have an opportunity to talk to her momentarily about what she saw.
I just wanted to quickly mention, so June 4th, I think it was, when Egypt closed the border without letting Hamas know, and then the next day, Hamas went and closed their side of the border. Because they were frustrated with the fact that Egypt had all these restrictions. You know, men between the ages of 18 and 40 have to apply to a visa before being able to pass through. So it's interesting, you know, it's kind of counterproductive, but there's a lot of interesting questions that I hope, you know, once we get our...
I hope so. Well, we've got joining us now via Skype, Eva Rezek. She's a blogger and student living in Gaza. Eva, thank you so much and welcome to the stream. We saw this video that you posted about the experience in Kalandia. Now we understand that the crossing has been opened today. What has been the response from people in Gaza?
You know, the response from the people is that they're cautiously happy and they're very excited, but it's like we're still not sure if it's open permanently. We're not still sure if it's like we're still having the list of 350 people who are allowed to cross, and we're still like not sure if it's like gonna be open as Egypt promised or not. So there is caution, you know.
Let me ask you a question, because one of the things we understood from the video is that you felt that mainstream media was not reporting, that mainstream media was actually claiming that the crossing was open when you got there and you saw that it was closed. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, at the same time we were in front of the Egyptian gate at the Palestinian side, and people were actually demonstrating and calling for lifting the siege and opening the crossing. At the same time, very known and very decent channels were broadcasting news saying that Rafah crossing is actually open. And when I checked with the security, Palestinian security at the gate, they said, "Do you see it open now?" And I said, "No." So he said, "No, it's fabrication. It's not open, and we're hoping it's gonna be open soon." So no one had a clue what was going on, but on the news, it was
Yeah.
everyone was saying that it's open.
Now, Nora, I want to get your thoughts on this. You know, it seems like there's a stark discrepancy between what she saw and what news was reporting or, from many different outlets. Why do you think you find that kind of discrepancy?
Well, the discrepancy is because our news media isn't reported straight from the mouth of people on the ground to and disseminated to everybody, but there goes through several different filters, including editorial boards, and unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation. But I think there was also an optimism about the opening of the Rafah border, and tell me if I'm wrong, Iba. But the idea was that they would open the border and suddenly there would be really the free flow of people and goods through Rafah in the era of a new, free, democratic Egypt. That just wasn't the case, as Egypt came down just as hard with security prerequisites, with just as many bureaucratic hurdles presented to Palestinians as had existed before. So was that the same thought amongst Palestinians in Gaza as well?
Yeah, sure. Like people were like like people were very excited with the promises of the new Egyptian government, and they were like very hopeful that it's going to be a new policy, and they're going to like ease the siege somehow because it's never going to be over by the opening of Rafah crossing. And but though everyone was shocked, and thousands or tens of people or hundreds of people were actually there to cross, as we all knew that, and I was there actually to register my name because I'm planning to go out for a workshop. So I was there and I saw everything happening, and was so shocking. And we had to film it, and we had to get the idea and the word out to the
But
people
I'm
because it
sorry
was.
to interrupt you. We're actually running into the end of our program, but we really appreciate you coming in, and we appreciate the video that you sent to us showing what happened, what you saw. We're having a tweet from Iman J on Twitter saying, social media has helped shape the Arab Revolution. Why hasn't it made much difference in Palestine? I think that what you're doing is refuting that. It is making a difference, and we appreciate you sharing your story with us. Thank you, Iba. Thank you, Nora, as well. Ahmed, as always. We'll be going into our post show now. We're going to be talking about some different issues that you would love to hear about. Tweet us at AJStream. As always, we will see you online. Welcome back to the Post Show. This is an opportunity for us to talk about some issues that we discussed during the show, but also to try some new stuff. And today we have a very special guest joining us. He is our main technical guru. Ben is in the house. He's going to talk to us about a tech story that I think is really interesting. While Ben gets set up, I just want to say something really quickly about this last tweet we saw on Palestine. And Nora, I would love to get your input. This idea that social media hasn't had an impact, but it seems like it's really having an impact. Are you hopeful?
Am I hopeful about Palestine?
Yeah.
Absolutely. There is no way for injustice to persist indefinitely. The end of it is always near. And so apartheid in Palestine will end. And so it's a matter of time. In terms of the impact of new social media on the conflict, I think that Joseph is absolutely right. We're challenging the discourse, Israeli discourse, which has the most firm hold here in the US, but is a completely different picture internationally. And finally, were it not for new social media, and were it not for the ability to transcend borders, how are we finally bearing witness to this coordinated, orchestrated, transnational march that happened on May 15th and similarly slowly happens on June 5th.
Yeah, one thing I just want to throw in there with regards to social media before we get to the IP stories, you know, there's this website called Freedom One World. And this is a coalition of, you know, musicians from the UK who have come together and created this song, and I'm just going to play it very briefly. And this song was, supported all over the world, and they have this platform of Facebook and Twitter to really, show solidarity with Palestine. And you saw artists like Coldplay endorsing this.
Can you expand it a little
Yeah,
bit?
we saw artists like, actually I cannot here, but I'll do this. But my point really is just that, you know, there was reports that for 24 hours, it was reported as spam, and it was taken down from Facebook, or it was impossible to post the link to this website. But I think this is all encouraging steps in a large process.
And what's really interesting about this is that this now becomes a new side of activism. So it becomes a battle of how many likes this video gets versus how many dislikes it gets.
Right.
And so there's this virtual activism that's happening that is actually quite relevant because it's an indicator of public opinion. And all of this work that everyone's doing, the purpose is to change public opinion in the court.
Forgive me, but very quickly, on the note of how many likes and how many dislikes, that was a very contentious point. And as you can see, YouTube has disabled commenting and the liking system for the video.
Wow, very interesting.
So,
well, you know,
controversial as always.
Is that YouTube, or was it a choice of the owner of the video?
That's actually a good question. However, there was a lot of controversy around the likes and dislikes.
So we're not sure who disabled
but
it.
it's been disabled.
Well, to that point, I think that this whole idea of how the internet and how technology is actually affecting the way we think about international relations is really interesting. And there's a story that Ben brought to our attention about what makes today a very special day that is really intriguing. And we're going to start with an explanation of the tech behind it, and then we're going to dive a little bit into how this impacts society.
Right, so it's a really esoteric situation, but I'll try and make it human. So today is a holiday in the nerd world. It's called IPv6 Day. And
IPv6 Day already?
Yeah, did you sing
man,
and celebrate?
we gotta have cake.
Well, and someone has made a cake or a cupcake here with an IP address written around the outside. And so IP is Internet Protocol, and today 400 different companies are trying out this new version of this Internet Protocol. And so normally, if you think about, if you've seen an IP address, it's 4 numbers that are 3 digits between 0 and 255. But when you look at how many different combinations you can make with that, the number winds up being just above 4 billion. And so this was a system that was set up back in the 80s when the internet was born. And no one had really considered how fast it was going to grow.
Right.
And so now, of course, we're outgrowing that. And in fact, in April, Asia, so all of those different addresses were split up regionally. And so there's a body that is in charge of handing them out in Asia to, among others, China and India. And in April, they ran out. They have a small reserve that's being doled out in a very specific way. But so. Anyway,
and just to explain why this matters, because IP addresses apply for websites that you might want to visit, and they also apply to potentially to devices. But basically, if you run out of these IP addresses, there's a problem every time somebody wants to launch a new web-based platform.
Absolutely.
And so one of the interesting things in this case, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, is that in some of the Western countries and in other regions, they still have plenty to go, but because of the massive growth in the Asia-Pacific region, you see that they've run out. So there's a differential incentive to actually move on to the new system. Can you talk to us about what that new system is?
Yeah, sure. So the new system is basically more numbers. And just real quick, I wanted to point out this map shows how regionally the different groups are running out. And the next group to run out is going to be Europe, and that's expected sometime around December.
And Europe
this
is
year.
The green or the what?
Europe would be.
It doesn't matter.
I guess this one here.
Yeah.
And the red one is
the
Asia
red
Pacific.
is Asia. Yeah. But so this new system is one of the reasons that people are concerned about it. There are several. Is that one of the ways to create those numbers is now going to be based on hardware. It's not the only way, but what that means is that everything in the world. Oh, so wait, let me back up. The new system, sorry.
No?
The new system has 340 trillion possible numbers.
And that's IPv6.
That's IPv6.
Okay.
And so with IPv6, every man, woman, and child on the planet could have 1,000 IP addresses.
That's big.
Meaning that all of their devices could be connected.
Yeah.
You know, your printers, you might have a wireless printer at home. You've
Which
got
has an
2
IP
cell
address.
phones here.
Yeah.
All of these things have IP addresses. But they're talking about, you know, some cars have them because they're connected to the internet now. Washers, dryers.
This brings us to the human aspect
Yeah.
of the story, because basically that means that when you go home,
Yeah.
your toaster, your fridge, your water faucet, your pacemaker,
Right.
your virtually any device,
Right.
any electric or electronic device that you deal with could potentially be wired. Now, there are benefits to that in the sense that it becomes much easier to have things like smart grid technology. Ben was giving an example of a usage where, let's say, your washer dryer could decide when to actually wash the clothes
Right.
in order to
Automated.
benefit based upon.
I think Toronto is working
Toronto's working on something like that right now, so that it doesn't go at a peak time of energy usage. Great for energy efficiency,
Right.
but what if, let's say, like your medical devices are wired and someone could conceivably hack into your pacemaker?
Right. Is that
That's a creepy idea.
So, but what's the actual takeaway for someone who's watching the show and who's going to say,
What do they
well,
need to know?
I heard that the IP addresses are running out. Why should that matter?
Well, they don't really need to worry right away.
Right.
Okay. There are lots of technologies for having additional ones.
Right.
For instance, your IP address at home might change from day to day or hour to hour because your neighbor might not be using their internet address. You obviously have multiple computers. You may have multiple computers in one location like we do, and we're sharing one IP address.
Yeah.
So there are sort of workarounds, but you know, at a point that all becomes a problem. And so as they launch IPv6, which isn't compatible with IPv4, the small equipment that you have at home, things like modems and routers, won't work. And eventually you'll have to invest in
It's
that
like
new
those
stuff.
senior citizens who had those old TVs when they all migrated to digital
Yeah,
from analog,
exactly.
right?
It's actually, that's a good analogy.
Good example.
I have a question for you, Ben.
Yeah.
Ben explained this to me before the show started, just so you know, and now that I'm listening to it again, I still don't get it.
Yeah.
So my question, and I hope your viewers also appreciate this, if I never understand this, or look into it, or understand what the next wave of IPv8 may be, will nerds like yourself keep us safe and sound?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. But a lot of the nerds that are out there don't, you know, don't work for newspapers. Some of them do.
Yeah.
But a lot work for, you know, governments and for corporations that have their own, you know, things in mind. So I would urge you, get on Wikipedia and
figure it out?
find a nerd and talk to them.
By the way,
Let them
there's
help
nothing
you.
wrong with being a nerd. I am a self-proclaimed dork, so it's quite okay.
We're in the
We're in the
same
same
family.
group.
Well, there's a difference between a dork and a geek, though. So, you know, I don't want to start splitting the nerddom into.
It's all
you know,
nuances. It's
Well,
all nuances.
but let's give you another example of how ways in which this potentially matters. So, for example, we're seeing that Asia is making a big push to move forward with it. Other places are a little bit slower, a little bit further behind. If you don't have IP addresses, you can't network new devices. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
You can't be a part of a network if we can't find where you are. That's the address. It's like saying, we want to send you mail. What's your address? I don't have one. Okay, you're not getting the mail. You need to have an IP address to be a part of the internet.
Right.
What is possible here is, as you have people moving from IPv4, which we're all on right now, to IPv6, is that you have the possibility of the development of another network. And the point that Ben is making is that your computer at home, your basic router or whatever, may not be able to connect to that new network unless you transfer technologies. And so I think there's the possibility that the nation states, the countries, the collectives that choose to move forward into the IPv6 world first may have a strategic advantage. And those that hold back, you know, maybe companies that are based, let's say, in the US or in Europe might upgrade in order to serve their Asian clients.
Right.
But if their Western clients don't also upgrade, if clients in Africa and Middle East and Europe and Latin America don't also upgrade, they may not be getting the same kinds of service, same kind of opportunities.
Great minds think alike. I just pulled that up. I didn't
you
even.
kidding?
Yeah, I swear. So explain quickly.
All right, so we both pulled up a page called the IPv6 test page, and ours is still running. But it will eventually tell us that we can't access
Mine
IPv6.
says that
and so,
I can't or I can't. No problems are anticipated for you.
well, look down.
Oh, I see what you mean.
IPv4, you're good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Here, let me. Well,
No-
can
no
you zoom in on the
IPv6.
red one?
Yeah.
So
But-
he says
so
no IPv6 address detected.
Google and Facebook have split their. You know, they've got a whole bank of computers, and today they decided a bunch of them need to be on IPv6.
Yeah.
And so you can't get to those ones.
Right.
But
Exactly.
luckily, they're still running ones for you
So
today.
to wrap it up, basically, there is the possibility of this divergent set where you can't go anywhere you want on the internet until the globe decides how to move forward together. That is our message to you, our present to you on IPv6 Day. We hope that you live in a country that wants to get connected. We certainly do. We look forward to seeing you again right here tomorrow. We'll see you online.